Today's actually a part of like a study session that I'm having right now. And yeah, this is part like thought experiment, part like AI experiment. So of course I had to share it with y'all, see what y'all was thinking, right? I have been studying Pakistan constitutional law for a course that I'm taking. And while I've been going through the material, I find myself returning to like certain questions. And like I had given a presentation before, so if you're interested in that one, which was called Who Can Sit in the Room. Like you can check that out on my page. But I just kind of found myself returning to a question from one of those presentations. And I was like, let's dig into this. Y'all know how I get. Like, let's get into it. I really want to kind of have a little bit more understanding like of who can actually sit in what who can sit in the room. So y'all know it look we getting serious. I got my glasses on. Because that's a salient question, especially when we're talking about like mediation, negotiations, and like negotiation talks and what's been going on with current events. I was like, let's get into the conversation of who can actually sit in the room, right? Because it's not just about the biggest military. It's not about who has the most money. Um, it's not always about who has the most influence, right? It's not always about that. So the question for me is when we say who can sit in the room, who can sit between these two powerful institutions, people, right? Situations, systems, for the point of this conversation, countries, who can actually sit in a room with them and actually be heard, right? So I took the framework from what I had developed in that other presentation. I'll give y'all a quick down and dirty before we listen to what the AI had to say. But I took that framework, I combined it with the constitutional law material covering federalism, rights, constitutional amendment, judicial oversight, and I asked Notebook News. I asked it to think through some thoughts for me, right? Like I want us to literally have like a little learn as you go, like learn with me kind of session today. Cause I'm like, this is gonna be so much fun. I literally have not listened to the audio, it just rendered. So I'm so excited that we literally get to listen to this together for the very first time. I'm about to do just to make sure that we're kind of like all on the same page is I'm just explain very quickly what the sit in the room framework is, right? So I started off with this. The question was who could be heard by both sides. So when I say who can be heard by both sides, we're talking about what's going on with the United States and with Iran. And I found it really interesting. Like the question became, what background or what unique situation allows for Pakistan to sit as the mediator at table, right? So I just was digging in, especially with me having this course I was taking. Oh, this I'm like, this is perfect timing. This is absolute perfect timing. So the real lens I'm looking at is legitimacy, right? Because power isn't just in strength. A lot of times it's about legitimacy. Who can walk into the room and be respected when they say something or think something like, because the question is, why do you respect their authority? Why do you respect or appreciate or value what they bring into a room, right? It's that legitimacy. So when we're looking at like the idea of mediation tonight, when we listen to whatever it comes up with as far as the information, um, don't just think of mediator as neutral. I want you to think about mediator from the perspective of like who can actually be understood. And I'm going to give you the setup right now. So I'm gonna present it in this order. Talking about the United States, Iran, and then Pakistan, right? I'm just gonna give you a little bit of their framework and setup based off what I've been studying. So when we listen to the information, it'll make sense. Okay. So here's where it gets interesting. Keep in mind these particular points. The United States has like is under like a federal republic, right? So the Constitution is the highest authority, right? I know certain news make you think something different, but the Constitution is the highest authority. So the US power flow is going to look like from the people to the Constitution to the government. That's the flow, right? People, Constitution to the government. Then we look at Iran. Iran would be Islamic Republic, okay? And the religious authority is central, okay? Religious authority is central. So the Iran power flow would look religious authority, then the government, then the law, okay? Religious authority, government, then the law. So now we're talking about the mediator who can like walk into this room. I looked at like Pakistan's setup, right? Because I'm told you I'm studying Pakistan law for a micro credential I'm getting while I'm studying law, international law. and at the University of London. And when I'm looking at their framework, right, it goes Federal Republic plus Islamic constitutional framework, right? Federal Republic plus the Islamic constitutional framework. So here's where it gets interesting, right? We said before the US has people to the Constitution to the government, which means that's Federal Republic. When we looked at Iran, it's Islamic Republic, right? With the religious being an authority. So with Pakistan, we have to keep in mind it goes the flow of people to the government, to the Constitution, and to the Islamic framework. What does that mean? That overlap. That overlap in certain elements of their framework and structure actually helps them be able to be respected when they walk in a room, right? That adds to the legitimacy because they understand the democracy and they understand the religious authority because it's a part of their framework. They are uniquely situated in a situation where their framework allows them to understand both parties that they potentially could be mediating with, right? So they have this beautiful overlap with regards to being able to sit in this position. Keep in mind, once again, in this room, US, the highest authority is constitution. Iran is religious authority. Pakistan is both, right? So they can understand what each is bringing to the table and what they're saying. Because a lot of times it's helping someone kind of understand where there are places where there could be agreement, there could be maybe a misunderstanding we might want to clarify, right? You have more opportunities to get to a resolution and to help people have better understanding when you can understand both parties in both positions, right? So that overlap is helping them not be rejected so that they can actually go, when I say them, helps the mediator not be rejected so that when they walk into that room, right, them not being rejected allows them to be able to sit in a space where they can help these people have a good conversation. It can help them facilitate good conversations. So under that framework, I took that framework that I have that I kind of like created for like a previous PowerPoint that's on my channel. And then what I did was I took 4, like, lectures that I had from, the course the actual class and training that I'm taking, and I threw it into Notebook LM to see what exactly they might say, right? Because it's more like a podcast structure. Once again, I have not heard anything that it said as far as this information. We are doing this together. We are learning together. Like, this is so exciting. I'm gonna pull it up because it just rendered. Just to make sure we walk through real quick, we talked about like who can sit in a room, right? Power isn't just about strength, but it's like literally about legitimacy. Why would someone be trusted? We talked about that piece. Why would someone be heard? We discussed that. What would give a country, institution, or a person an ability to sit at the table? Right. I'm really curious what the AI was going to say. People have a lot of things to say about AI in general. I'm just sitting over here super curious about what it's going to say. So with that being said, I am pulling it up right now. And then I had some kind of questions I was thinking about, but once again, I don't know what it says. So my questions might totally change. If you find as you're listening that you have some questions, put them in the chat because once again, there's a chat function for Notebook, what's called your Notebook LM. I'm gonna throw it in there and we'll see what it says. I'll tell it to read the screen, child. Listen, we doing this together. When I was in college, well, the first time I did it 10 years ago, they had stuff like this. So, I am like literally over here having a Jinkies moment. But y'all who know, I'm talking about Scooby Doo and the mystery bus type of experiences. Okay.
Country's constitution as this mass you know, we usually
Yeah.
think of a country's constitution as this massive dusty domestic rule book. Right, like the ultimate set of internal house rules. Exactly. Something that's strictly for the people living inside its borders. I mean, we rarely imagine it having much utility beyond that. But what if a constitution isn't just a domestic rule book? What if the way a country organizes its internal legal code is actually its diplomatic passport? It's a fascinating concept. I mean, it forces a complete reassessment of how we view international relations, really.
Hmm.
We are so conditioned to assume diplomacy is driven purely by, military might or economic leverage. Right, the usual suspects. Yeah, exactly. Yet the foundational legal text of a nation, the way it legally defines power and authority within its own borders, that might actually be the key to who it can speak with on the global stage. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are going on a fascinating journey just for you, exploring exactly that dynamic. Our mission today is to dissect how a nation's internal constitutional features dictate its external international legitimacy, and specifically its unique ability to act as a geopolitical mediator. And to do this, we are pulling from a really specific stack of sources. On the
Hmm.
legal side, we're analyzing educational materials developed by the University of London for their undergraduate laws micro-credential on Pakistani law. Which is incredibly detailed. Oh, very. It gives us the raw structural framework of a very unique state. And then to bridge that into the geopolitical realm, we're pairing it with a strategic civic analysis presentation. It's titled Who Can Sit in the Room? US versus Iran versus Pakistan. And that presentation basically takes all those dense legal concepts and drops them right into real world power dynamics. So, to frame this entire conversation for you, I want to use an analogy. Think of a constitution like a computer's operating system. Okay, I like where this is going. Right. So, if you have two countries running on completely incompatible operating systems, say, one is running on a modern Mac ecosystem and the other is running on like an old DOS framework, they're going to struggle to communicate. Because they literally cannot read each other's files. Exactly. They don't recognize each other's administrative privileges.
Hmm.
But what happens if a third country is running a hybrid operating system, like one designed from the ground up to translate between both? That is the perfect way to look at it. Because to understand how a nation can actually translate between different global powers, we first have to, you know, pop the hood and look at that unique constitutional code. In this case, we're looking at Pakistan's 1973 constitution, which establishes the state as an Islamic federal republic. And that phrasing, I mean, that isn't just the ceremonial title, is it? Not at all. It is the literal blueprint of a hybrid system. Let's look at the federal republic element first. The University of London text details a system of shared sovereignty.
Mhm.
The Constitution's fourth schedule specifically divides legislative powers. Meaning the power isn't all hoarded in one place. Right. It ensures that the central government handles
Okay.
federal issues, while the four provinces, Punjab, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Balochistan, plus the Islamabad Capital Territory, they maintain autonomy over regional matters. And because it is a republic, the ultimate source of that shared geographical power is the electorate. You have a standard bicameral legislature, right? The National Assembly and the Senate. Exactly. Power flows from the people through their elected representatives. There's an elected president as the head of state under Article 41, and a prime minister as the head of government under Article 91. So, to anyone living in a Western democracy, that operating system feels incredibly familiar.
Hmm.
Power flows upward from the democratic will of the populace. But the second half of that constitutional identity is where the code becomes highly customized. Yes, the Islamic framework. The 1973 Constitution merges that standard federal republican structure with pervasive religious principles. The foundational component of this is Article 2, which declares Islam the state religion. And then there's the objectives resolution, right? All right, Article 2A. The objectives resolution is woven directly into the substantive part of the Constitution. It states unequivocally that sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Allah Almighty alone, and that the authority delegated to the state is a sacred trust. It must operate within its prescribed limits.
Hmm.
Which, I mean, that introduces an immediate structural tension. Constitution mandates that all laws must conform to the Quran and Sunnah. It even sets very specific character-based qualifications for members of parliament under Article 62 and 63. The Sadiq and Amin requirements. Exactly, requiring them to be truthful and trustworthy under Islamic principles. But I have to push back here on behalf of the listeners. This feels like a glaring contradiction. How so? Well, how can a system function if it says, on one hand, that legislative power flows upward from the democratic will of the people, but on the other hand, says absolute sovereignty flows downward from divine authority? Like, if the people elect someone to write laws based on popular will, but a higher authority has already dictated the bounds of those laws, who is actually in charge? It is the defining friction of the state, absolutely. But the Constitution views this not as contradiction, but as a deliberate harmonization. Harmonization. Yeah. The people absolutely drive the legislative process. They
Mhm.
elect the representatives, and those representatives debate and pass laws. However,
Add sources
law
language web
provisions
keyboard underscore arrow
go
underscore
back.
down search underscore smart fast research keyboard underscore arrow underscore down search label underscore auto select all drive underscore PDF Pakistan
did
constitutional amendments dot PDF more underscore vert drive underscore PDF Pakistan law
One
constitution.
second. Oh,
PDF more underscore vert drive underscore
Important.
PDF Pakistan law writs dot PDF more underscore vert drive underscore
okay.
PDF Pakistan fundamentals dot PDF more underscore vert image underscore pic audio underscore magic underscore erase 1.0x replay underscore 10 forward underscore 10 acute.
Okay. Y'all ready? Okay.
This. The Constitution establishes specific, powerful institutions.
Okay.
The federal Shariat court under Article 203 is the prime example. It has the jurisdiction to examine and decide whether any law or provision is repugnant to the injunctions of Islam.
Mhm.
So it operates less like basic guardrails on a highway and more like I don't know, a constitutional veto gate. The elected parliament can design and build whatever vehicle they want, but the Shariat court acts as the safety inspector. If the vehicle violates the fundamental religious blueprint, they pull it off the road. That captures the dynamic perfectly. And there is also the Council of Islamic Ideology, which is an advisory body that reviews laws and recommends ways to bring legislation into conformity with Islamic injunctions. The entire system is this intricate dance. Right. It is a republic where the legislature reflects the will of the citizens, but it is deliberately bounded by religious law enforced by specialized judicial bodies. But a constitution cannot just survive as a philosophical balancing act in the capital. If we are exploring how this structure grants international legitimacy, we have to recognize that external legitimacy is deeply tied to internal stability. So, how does this highly complex framework function for the citizens actually living under it, especially when the state is under stress? Well, the lived reality of the citizen is governed by the Constitution's fundamental rights chapter. These are actionable claims the individual holds against state overreach. The University of London materials group these protections into some really compelling categories.
Mhm.
Give me some examples. You have civic protections, like Article 10A, the guarantee of a fair trial and due process.
Mhm.
You have social obligations, like Article 25A, the mandate for the state to provide free and compulsory education for children aged 5 to 16.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and crucially, within a religious republic, you have explicit constitutional requirements under Article 36
Mhm.
for the state to protect the legitimate rights and interests of minorities. What
Oh,
stands out in the source text, at least to me, is how the Constitution handles emergencies. Because many constitutions globally contain provisions to suspend certain civil liberties during a declared state of emergency or war. Right, that's pretty standard. But the 1973 Constitution creates a strict hierarchy of rights. It explicitly dictates that Article 9, the right to life and liberty, and Article 20, the freedom of religion, those can never be fully suspended, regardless of whatever crisis the state is facing. Which is structural commitment. However, outlining rights on a piece of paper is, it's meaningless without an accessible enforcement mechanism. It's just ink. Exactly. In this system, that enforcement is handled primarily by the high courts through the issuance of writs under Article 199 of the Constitution.
mhm.
A writ is essentially a formal, legally binding command from the court to a public authority, forcing them to correct an unlawful act. So, to make the mechanics of that real for you, let's look at a couple of the most common writs. The most vital one is habeas corpus.
Mhm.
If an individual is detained unlawfully by the police or security forces, this writ compels the state to physically bring the detained person before a judge and legally justify the incarceration. Right. And if they cannot justify it, the person is released immediately. It is the fundamental mechanism preventing citizens from simply disappearing into the state apparatus. Another crucial mechanism is the writ of mandamus. While habeas corpus prevents the state from doing something illegal, mandamus forces a public authority to actually perform a legal duty that they were refusing to do. But here is the critical operational detail regarding the high courts, and this is really important. They do not generally use suo motu powers. Suo motu meaning? It means on its own motion.
Mhm.
The high courts essentially sit and wait for a citizen or their representative to file a petition before they intervene. They don't just watch the evening news and decide to issue a writ of mandamus on their own. They require the citizen to actually pull the alarm. Exactly. That constraint on judicial power is fascinating,
Mhm.
especially because constitutions are living documents that constantly undergo software updates, to shift where power sits. Since 1973, Pakistan's constitution has had 26 amendments. That's a lot of updates. Right. Some adapt to pure administrative needs, like the 25th Amendment a few years ago. That one fully integrated the federally administered tribal areas into the neighboring Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which drastically shifted the legal reality for millions of citizens there. But the brand new 26th Amendment, that is a massive, systemic update to how the branches of government interact. Oh, it is a fundamental rebalancing of powers, specifically targeting the judiciary. The sources outlines major changes here. First, it directly addresses that concept of suo motu we just discussed. Suo motu extensively, right? Yes, very extensively. Yeah. Initiating hearings on issues of public importance without waiting for a petition at all. The 26th Amendment aggressively curtails that power. It prevents individual judges or even the Chief Justice from initiating these cases unilaterally. Wow. It also creates dedicated constitutional benches. Right. The idea being that these specialized benches handle the heavy structural constitutional interpretations, theoretically freeing up the rest of the Supreme Court to process the massive backlog of regular civil and criminal appeals. That's the theory, yes. But the third change in this amendment, I mean, this is the one that completely alters the political landscape. For decades, the Chief Justice was selected based on strict seniority. When the current one retired, the most senior judge automatically took the seat. Right. The 26th Amendment throws that automatic succession completely out the window. Now, a special parliamentary committee selects the new Chief Justice from among the three most senior judges. And that committee requires a 2/3 majority to confirm the selection. Okay, I need to pause us and really unpack the mechanics of this impartially because the implications are huge.
Okay, so it said pause real quick. Do you guys have any questions? Any thoughts so far? Like, it's interesting, right? Because once again, keep in mind, as we're looking through this, we're talking about the conversation of who gets to sit in the room, especially talking about with regards to like diplomacy, and we're talking about positionality in these negotiations. It's just really interesting to look at their constitutional framework, they're just framework as a whole, and their placement and posture. So if you had questions, feel free. I said if y'all had questions, I throw them into this little chat and I'll read whatever it says with regards to the documents that I specifically have, right? It's going to be through that lens in that context. But you had a question, they said they're going to take a second to dive in. I thought this would be the perfect time to ask y'all if y'all wanted to, ask any questions. We had a couple more minutes of that podcast, right? A couple more minutes of that going on before we jump into our discussion here. So, are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none at this time, I'm gonna go ahead and press play so we can get back into these receipts. I told you I come with receipts. One thing I'm good at is studying, okay? Boom. Getting some information. So here we go. Back into it.
Moving the appointment of the nation's top judge away from an automatic internal judicial ladder and placing it into the hands of politicians in a legislative petition automatic succession completely out the window. Now, a special parliamentary committee selects the new Chief Justice from among the three most senior judges. And that committee requires a 2/3 majority to confirm the selection. Okay, I need to pause us and really unpack the mechanics of this impartially because the implications are huge. Moving the appointment of the nation's top judge away from an automatic internal judicial ladder and placing it into the hands of politicians in a legislative committee that injects politics directly into the highest court. It certainly changes the dynamic. Right. I mean, a 2/3 majority is a high bar, meaning the ruling government usually can't just pick their favorite judge without negotiating with the opposition parties. But even with that mathematical safeguard, does this function as a necessary check and balance on a judiciary that had perhaps grown too powerful with its suo motu actions? Or does it dangerously compromise the independence of the courts? It's the defining constitutional debate of the moment there. Analyzing this purely through the lens of our legal sources, it is an undeniable reassertion of legislative supremacy over the judicial branch. For years, the judiciary in South Asian legal systems has frequently waded into political and administrative domains. So this is pushback. Exactly. By removing the unilateral suo motu power and altering the appointment process so it requires the consensus of elected representatives, the legislative branch is pulling power back to parliament. It forces the judiciary's leadership to be a product of democratic negotiation rather than an insulated automatic progression. It limits judicial overreach, but simultaneously, yes, it makes the judiciary more beholden to the political climate of the day.
We've spent a lot of time mapping this out because it is such a singular internal balancing act. We have a democratic legislative republic that constantly wrestles for power with an independent judiciary, all while operating under the overarching authority of Islamic law and specialized religious courts.
Mhm.
This brings us to the core of our mission today.
The geopolitical angle.
Right. How does this incredibly complex internal machinery translate into global power?
This is exactly where the internal rulebook becomes the diplomatic passport. This specific hybridized structure is the source of Pakistan's unique leverage in international mediation.
Mhm.
To fully grasp this, we have to transition to the strategic civic analysis presentation we mentioned earlier, Who Can Sit in the Room, which maps the diplomatic friction between the US and Iran and places Pakistan right in the middle.
That presentation introduces a premise that challenges everything we assume about global negotiations.
Mhm.
It argues that in the high stakes world of international mediation, power isn't about military threat or financial sanctions. It is entirely about legitimacy.
Yeah.
We often assume a mediator needs to be a neutral, blank slate like a nation with absolutely no dog in the fight. But the analysis asserts that mediators do not need to be neutral, they need to be understood.
And that distinction changes the entire geopolitical calculus. Let's examine why communication historically breaks down between the United States and Iran by mapping their internal power flows.
Mhm.
According to the presentation, in the United States, power flows linearly from the people who establish the Constitution, which then dictates the limits of the government.
Right. The Constitution is the supreme secular authority. Everything is judged against it.
Exactly. Now look at
Mhm.
Iran. The presentation maps an entirely different paradigm. In Iran, power flows from supreme religious authority down to the government, which then administers the law. Divine authority is the absolute, unquestionable center of the state's legitimacy.
So when American diplomats sit across from Iranian diplomats, they aren't just disagreeing on, say, nuclear enrichment or regional proxy conflicts.
Mhm.
They are speaking fundamentally incompatible languages of power.
The American negotiator constantly appeals to constitutional frameworks, international law, and democratic mandates.
While the Iranian negotiator appeals to divine sovereignty and religious imperatives, because their internal operating systems have zero structural overlap, they cannot grant each other fundamental legitimacy. The Mac and the DOS system are trying to network, and it just throws an error message.
That's a great way to visualize it. But then
Mhm.
you put Pakistan in the room. Look at the power flow we just spent this deep dive unpacking. In Pakistan, power flows from the people upward to the government, which is governed by the Constitution, which is bounded by the Islamic framework.
It is the ultimate hybrid system.
Yes. And
Mhm.
the strategic analysis reveals that this is Pakistan's greatest diplomatic asset. Because Pakistan's internal constitution successfully bridges these concepts, it deeply understands the mechanics of democratic constitutionalism, just like the US, while simultaneously understanding and practicing supreme religious authority, just like Iran.
It's
Mhm.
like having a highly empathetic bilingual friend at a
Mhm.
tense dinner party where
I
two
like that.
prominent guests speak completely different languages and honestly hold completely different worldviews.
Mhm.
Pakistan doesn't just sit there and literally translate the words across the table. Because of its own lived constitutional experience, it actually understands the deep cultural, legal, and moral weight behind those words for both the American and the Iranian sides.
And this dual nature allows Pakistan to be granted legitimacy by both sides of the table. When an American diplomat raises concerns about legislative authority or the separation of powers, the Pakistani delegation understands the critical importance of those concepts because they navigate a federal republic every single day.
Right.
Conversely, when an Iranian diplomat emphasizes the absolute supremacy of Islamic injunctions, the Pakistani delegation understands the gravity of that because their own laws are vetted by a federal Sharia court.
So both the US and Iran look at Pakistan's system and see enough of their own reflection to trust the mediator.
Mhm.
They see enough structural overlap that they do not reject the mediator outright. The presentation points out that this shared translated legitimacy is the key that unlocks the door for critical geopolitical events. Specifically, it highlights Pakistan's ability to host the complex April 2026 Islamabad talks.
It proves that a nation's internal legal architecture is not confined to its borders. The way a country organizes its internal authority, the way it balances the will of the people against religious mandates or judicial oversight, directly dictates who will listen to it on the global stage. The internal structure creates the external utility. Precisely. It is a wild journey to take. I mean, we started by dissecting the technical details of the fourth schedule, the philosophical friction of the objectives resolution, and the mechanics of habeas corpus writs. And by simply following the logic of those internal legal mechanics, we ended up in the high stakes, closed door rooms of global peace talks. It completely changes how you look at international news, doesn't it? It really does. When you hear about a summit or a negotiation now, the first question shouldn't just be about the economic stakes. It should be about the constitutional alignment of the people at the table. Because the internal code always dictates the external network. Which leaves me, and hopefully you listening, with a final lingering question to ponder as we wrap up today's deep dive. If a country's internal legal structure dictates its external diplomatic power, what happens when a country undergoes a massive constitutional rewrite or revolution? When a nation fundamentally alters its internal operating system, do they merely change the laws for their citizens, or do they instantly change the international rooms they're even allowed to step into? Does a new constitution revoke an old diplomatic passport? Exactly. Something to think about the next time a nation decides to rewrite its rules. Keep questioning the systems operating around you, and as always, stay curious. We will catch you next time.
Okay, boom. First off, I didn't know they were gonna weave in like my presentation as much as they did. So that was a little delectable treat. I like that. I definitely feel like I'm going to use this a lot more. I loved the whole presentation of that. So do y'all have questions? Because we can feed questions into this little chat here. Child, I'm all up in these receipts. You hear me? I'm all into this thing. Like, what themes did you feel like showed up? Because we talked about a lot of things thematically, but like, what did you feel like showed up? Because I kind of gave us a foundation about the element of like legitimacy, right? When you walk in a room, you want to make sure that you're not going to be rejected at the door, right? That you can actually walk in, be respected, both sides understand, okay, I respect, what you bring to the table. I'm willing to sit, I'm willing to talk, I'm willing to listen to you, right? Um, what essentially is being brought to the table. So once again, with that foundation being brought up, did you feel like legitimacy kept coming up? I felt like it definitely did, right? Which I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't know what type of content was going to be on here. As I told you guys, this was my first time listening to it. Not my first time using Notebook LM. I used it a couple years ago when I first heard about it, and I kind of hadn't done anything with it. And I said I was going to try to use it, as a studying tool, right? So once again, another question being like, did trust keep coming up? Because I feel like it does. You need to feel like you can trust who's in the room with you, right? You sitting in the room, y'all trying to negotiate, you're potentially willing to what? Give up something, right? You're potentially saying, I'm going to take on something, right? I gotta trust that you're gonna do what you say you're gonna do. I gotta trust and believe that you will operate in what good faith is a term that you often would be used in that situation. Um, so did you feel like the conversation or the theme of trust came up? Did like constitutional structure matter? Because I feel like a lot of times I've never really heard people talk about these discussions through a lens of like constitutional framework and structure. And that's another reason why I wanted to dive into it, especially with the fact that I was already studying this content right now. Because do you feel like the constitutional structure mattered? I feel like it does. Right. That made me a little bit more comfortable with the idea of the negotiations, right? And who was all in that particular room. But for some people, it might not. So I'm curious, did you feel like constitutional structure mattered when we were sitting in this discussion? Did rights matter? Did accountability matter? Uh, like, did you feel like the AI missed anything that you feel like probably should have been brought up? Keeping in mind, a limitation is it's based off of the information I input. So I input 4 lectures. I input my who can, sit at the table framework that I had from another presentation or another live I did here, which you can go check out. It's on my channel. It dove into a lot more from my perspective of what I was studying at that time, but I just gave you a quick down and dirty of what I included just so you would know as they were presenting whatever, AI just generated, which was that amazing podcast. So that's that. Did you feel like AI missed anything? If so, what was the thing you feel like they missed? Did y'all agree with it? What'd you think? Right? Were you surprised? I wasn't like overly surprised, but I love that. I'm someone who like loves analogies. I love having a really good anchor. I love the reference to like the idea of like this bilingual friend who kind of sits in the room as like a translator, right? So to speak, helping you catch the things that you're missing. Like conceptually, I feel like there's some things I was saying, but maybe I was a little bit more like at the beginning stages of saying that where they were very complex yet very thorough and comfortable with the way they presented it. So I just love listening to that. I'll probably give it a couple more listens. Um, just because I am like that, right? Were you surprised by anything that you heard from either me or directly or through this like lens of this AI podcast that we were able to put together based off that information? Were you surprised by anything? Have a look in the chat. Once again, good evening to you all. Thank you for some of the comments and the compliments that are in the chat. I see that we have someone from India. Hello. I know that I have a pretty decent sized global audience and it shows me like where my content is being sent. I really appreciate you all um, tapping into my content and I hope you're finding it to be enjoyable content. I am studying international law and I try to look at things and offer like really interesting comparators. I'm always interested. One place did it this way, how's another place do it? Uh, what's going on with the contracts? Like what's the governance? Who gives the authority for certain kinds of things? What's the mechanics of certain processes? So I'm always interested in the feedback that you guys offer me about how you're like processing some of this information. Um, because once again, that helps me be able to understand things through different lenses, which allows me to feel a little bit more comfortable with content because I'm seeing it from different angles, from different people, from different places. So once again, welcome to the live. Thank you for, visiting my channel and my page and what have you. And if you have any questions, always feel free to throw it in the chat, even if it's after the chat is over or the live is over. It'll go on replay mode and still going to be on my page. So feel free to place your comments there. I'm always reading and engaging with you guys because once again, I feel like this is learning out loud. I really feel like that is something that we all should be able to do is not gatekeep certain kind of information. So although I can't give you guys my presentation because that's in a conflict with what I agreed to as a student at the university, I can certainly share my study materials, especially if they're things that I'm creating. So that's what I wanted to offer here. I wanted to make it accessible because this is certain things that I feel like should be accessible to everyone so that we can all be able to really look at the things that are happening in the world and say, okay, like, well, what do I think? What does that mean? What does that imply? How does that impact us? And I always have this conversation of how do we absorb the harm of the impact as the constituent, as the consumer, as the client? Like when they're sitting in these negotiations, there are harms or there are elements, consequences, neither party is really going to absorb. So what happens is usually their constituencies, like, the people, us, we kind of absorb that. So it's wise for us to kind of know when they're walking into these rooms like what is going on and being able to prepare ourselves so that we can figure out how we want to cope, how we want to deal, how we want to adapt, how we want to respond to things from the lens in which we are able, right? And then when it comes time for us to have to elect, we elect the individuals that best represent, our needs and present as someone motivated to address our needs, right? Because even in that being said, a lot of times those who are appointed came from those who were elected. So that we do have an ability to do, but we need to be informed so we know what to do when we do have those options and those opportunities. So I'm always looking at not just what the headlines say, but like I want us to dig a little bit deeper. Like, what does that mean? Like, foundationally, at the core, what can be offering some guidance to the things that we are currently seeing? Maybe the things that we don't hear being spoken about, but it's in the room, right? Clearly from at least from this presentation of this information, the constitutional structure is playing a big factor about what's happening in the room, right? Your ability to hear and see and understand and respect who you're sitting in the room with. So I'm so excited. Once again, sometimes studying can kind of be like, so it's really nice when you can have something that you can listen to and study and kind of like have more interactive engagement so that I can have more anchors in my own brain as I prepare for the exam or the assessment, so to speak. So pretty much in close, at the end of the day, what do you think like gives someone a seat at the table? Like these are things that I'm constantly processing. Is it power? Is it trust? Is it legitimacy? Is it relationships? Is it something else? That's something I really want us to kind of chew on. Today was a day of diplomacy discussions. We talked about UFC earlier this morning, or maybe like high noon. We talked about that. That was really interesting, right? Sports diplomatics, right? And now we're talking about the negotiations, like who can sit in those rooms, who can be heard, who can be respected, who can be seen, the legitimacy of that. So that was just the focus of today. Kind of a little bit of get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this and that. So I'm so excited that I was able to get this done. I didn't know if I'd be able to tie these different tasks I had today into something I could share with you all, but I'm so happy that I was able to make that work. Once again, this is Adrian from Legally Everywhere with Child. We legally everywhere looking into everything. Hopefully you enjoyed this live. I enjoyed the opportunity to learn out loud with you. I will see you all in the next video. Have a wonderful evening.